Hi, I'm G. Welcome back to my art channel, and today I'm showing you how to draw this camellia flower using markers. So as usual, I'll start out with a clean pencil line drawing of this flower, and the markers that I'm going to use are Nova Designer markers. There's the colors that you can see I'm going to use, ranging from light to dark. And just in case you wanted to try this using Promarkers or Copics, there is what I think the comparable colors would probably be. This close-up shows that I try to keep the pencil lines really as light as possible for the petals that I'm working on. So I just erase them down as lightly as I possibly can so I can still see them. And then I make a start with my markers and get straight in. And the first marker you can see me using is the RV00, and this is a pale pink. So I'm starting with my very lightest color first of all. And that's because this time I'm working with a layering approach. The last time you saw me drawing a marker picture with flowers, it was a yellow rose, and I used a blending technique to try and blend the colors gradually, carefully, smoothly, and seamlessly. This time it's going to be a slightly more starker graphic image because I'm using the layering technique, and that means that I put on my lightest color, I let that dry, and then I put on my next color, and I work upwards from light to dark, but each of the colors you'll be able to see will show, and it'll have a kind of a hard edge because I've let it dry before I add the next color. So after I'd done the first few petals with this light pink color, I was looking at them thinking, maybe I'll just try and add that pink again, make us a kind of a second layer so it looks a little bit darker before I add my next color. So here I am just layering up the exact same pink, but of course because I'm putting on a second layer, it's hopefully going to look a little bit darker before I then move up the scale with my other colors. So as I zip forwards a little bit there, you can see that I've popped it on, and the difference is kind of there, but it's quite subtle. So now I'm going in with my next marker. Now this one is RV11, and this is a much brighter kind of pink, and you already can see a bit of a contrast. But what I'm doing is I'm popping the colors in here, and I'm trying to show those kind of delicate little lines like the veins that you will see on the leaf. Not in the pure shadow sections because it's more difficult to make out the veins in those dark sections. But for the areas where there is light shining on the leaf, those little kind of like feathered, broken lines that you can see me drawing are supposed to stand in for being the veins that you can see on the petals of this flower. One thing hopefully you notice is that when I've got one petal and it's emerging from behind another one, I put quite a lot of color there, quite a lot of the darker shadow areas there, and that provides a nice contrast where I've left, you should be able to see the edge of that petal, I've left it white, paper white, like a nice highlight, and then I'm beginning to add this kind of darker pink, this RV11, against that edge, and then flick it upwards and flick it back down again. So I'm really showing the contrast between those two petals where one is popping out in front of the other one. So that's my second color on, and I've left that to dry, and then I change up to now this is my third color, and this is RV02, and this is like a kind of a dull red, if you will. It's not quite as bright as a red, but it's a bit duller and it's a bit darker than the pink I've just put on. And you can see me now adding this extra layer of slightly dark color in there, but I'm making super sure that I don't cover over the colors I've already put in there. You can clearly see the pink that I put on, the RV11, and now I'm adding this slightly darker shade, and it's just to make some of those shadows have a little bit more oomph and a little bit more power before I start adding some of my other darker colors. I've got one more dark color to add, and that's like quite a bright red, and it's quite a jump up. So I'm glad that I've got this RV02 in here, because then hopefully the changes that you'll see between the very palest pink that I put on first and then all these other colors that I'm adding, you'll see a slightly more gradual change, or at least that's the hope. So here I go with R15 now. As you can see, this is quite a bright red. This is like a scarlet. So I use this sparingly because this is going to be, at this point, my deepest, darkest shadow color. I'm not planning on using anything darker than this at this stage. So as you see me put this on, this is my final color that I'm looking to add. So it's a really, really deep red to be the shadow. But again, you should be able to see all the other colors I've put on so far, and this is part of the layering technique, allowing all of those colors to be seen. You might be looking at this now and thinking, ooh, that's quite a big jump in kind of like darkness from your third color that you put onto that deep dark red, that R15. And you're right, it is a big jump, and I would have liked a transitional color in between that dark pink and the red, but I just didn't have one in the pack. and I really wanted to get into doing this drawing, so it just became a kind of like needs must. I had to use what I had to hand, and plus I quite liked the very stark way that red performed as a shadow, so I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can go with this. So I just thought I'd persevere with it. So as you can see me handling the middle section, I'm putting on all of these layers of pinks and working up from light to the dark. You should be able to see that I'm leaving quite a few little highlights on the edge of petals. Now, this is not something that I did when I was doing the yellow rose last year, because it was yellow across everything, whereas this picture has got a much starker contrast between light areas and dark areas. So I'm leaving those white bits as I go along, and this is where perhaps having the watercolor training that I've got comes in really, really handy, because of course in watercolor you leave white highlights from the beginning, really, if you want them to stay nice and fresh throughout the painting. So I already had that kind of mindset leading into this, which was good. It meant I wasn't going to have to rely on using a white pen or a white gel pen at the end to put marker highlights in. I was going to leave those and hopefully keep them throughout the whole of the picture. So I've worked on that small section first, and it was working for me and I was happy with it. So now you can see me rolling out across the entire flower this effect that I've got going on, and this approach, this process of layering up my colors from the light to the dark. So you should notice straight away the very kind of graphic and hard-edged kind of quality that this layering approach gives you. And you might like it, and you might think it looks good, or you might be looking at it going, I prefer it when it's all blended. And, why would you work with this technique when you can blend things? Well, it gives you a different look. I mean, clearly that hard-edged look is very, very different from the smooth way that some blended colors can go together. So it gives you a different approach, and for that reason you might want to try it. If you're a beginner with markers, you might want to try layering, because it gives you a lot more time to work with the markers and try and get the kind of effects you need. Blending, you have to work quickly while the inks are still wet to make them blend together and get that lovely, smooth, seamless quality. But with layering like this, you can put on your first color and then you can go off, have a cup of tea, get distracted, watch TV, and then come back and put the second layer on. Time is so much less a factor, and therefore it gives you a much more relaxed approach to what you're doing. One of the things to be aware of with layering, though, is that you really need to, or at least I found, you need to work from your lightest color up to your darkest color. What I found is if you try putting dark colors on first and light colors on top, then it would almost react like a sort of bleach. The lighter color would kind of like make this funny kind of weird lightish mark on your darker color that actually wasn't very attractive, didn't look very good, or at least I found it this way. So I found the best way for me to work with layering was to make sure that I was putting on my light color, then my sort of lightish to darkish, medium color, and then dark colors last. And that seemed to work the best way for what I wanted to show. Now, the markers that I'm using have got some nice sturdy fine tips, and you can see that I can get some pretty fine lines out of these. I will say though that for working with the flower, if I was using perhaps a brush tip marker, I would be able to get a slightly softer, more feathered, more flicked line with some of these kind of like strokes that I'm doing and some of these shadows that I'm doing. So I could probably get it to be darker, and then if I flicked the stroke with a brush tip of a marker, I get a much more feathered and tapered end to some of my strokes, and that would give it a slightly softer and more delicate look. So the kind of the harder tip that I've got working here is good, and it's standard on most kind of markers. But yeah, you would get a slightly different, gentler effect if you were able to sort of flick these tapered strokes using a brush tip marker instead. So as I was getting more of the flower done and it was nearing being completed, I was pleased with the way that it had gone. But I kind of felt that the red that I put on, although it was nice and dark and contrasty next to the other pinks that I was putting on, it wasn't quite dark enough in the deep, dark shadow areas that I need it to be when I was looking at the reference photo. So I was already doing these last petals thinking, I'm thinking I've got to try and dig a slightly darker red out of my markers box here and, use that really sparingly, just add some extra definition within those red shadows. So I resorted to picking up a different marker, and this marker was called R20, and you can just see me now adding R20 very sparingly, just some little flicked bits in the middle, and maybe working myself outwards, but not too much. I really didn't want to overpower it with super strong shadows, but I wanted to add a bit more definition in those shadows, and that is what this fifth colored marker was for. You'll probably smile when you see it side by side with the reference photo, because the reference photo is so much more pink, but I just didn't have that many darkish pinks to get this done, so that's why I had to resort to the reds. I'm still pleased with it though, but let me know in the comments below what you thought of it and what you thought of the layering approach to markers. And don't forget to check out some of my previous marker videos, and why not subscribe, like or share, because all of that stuff really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for watching.